today. For those who perhaps haven't been here yet, welcome to the Hungry Book Club. This is a 3-part series digging into the interconnections between well-being, the impact of the digital age, and food and lifestyle culture. So I've really been spending my professional life over, post-college, really looking at the ways that we spend our discretionary time and income and analyzing how that reflects our rising rates of anxiety and depression and loneliness. So using things like avocado toast or an obsession with goat yoga or even ASMR videos, and instead of making fun of it, saying, what is this actually saying about us? What are we trying to express with this? Why are we all on TikTok? Why are we obsessed with sourdough bread? And today we're going to get into actually what was my favorite part of the book to research and to write, which is around well-being, eudaimonia, connection to nature. For those who haven't met me, I am a writer. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Food for Climate League that launched in 2019 with funding from Google, working to really kind of take all of these other connections and match it with sustainability to fuel a sustainable food movement by speaking to all of our core human needs. And today we're going to dig into the topics that are in the part 3 of Hungry, aspects of DIY, really the connection to our own bodies, to nature and well-being. I'm doing the brief 5-minute intro right now. I then have a long list of questions for Dr. Keltner. And then there's also going to be time for you all to ask a few questions. So please feel free, just type them into the chat and we'll get going. I'm going to stop my share. Oh, before we kind of get into this. So the first 2 sessions that we had, the first one was about our desire for control and safety. The second last week with Dr. Brian Primack was all about our desire for community and belonging. And we really dug into whether social media has been good or bad for that facilitation of community. And today we're going to be focusing in on how we all cultivate a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to introduce Dacher. Thank you again for joining us. Dr. Keltner is a professor of psychology at University of California, Berkeley. He is director of the Berkeley Social Interaction Laboratory and the founding director of the Greater Good Science Center. For anyone interested in this topic, you can spend many hours on the Greater Good Science Center website, as I have, looking at a number of articles, both academic and then also ones that they've really made very, very approachable for the general public. So if you're not in academia, don't feel shy about going on their website and looking around. Dr. Keltner is also the host of the Greater Good Science Center's award-winning podcast, The Science of Happiness. Also highly recommend it. It's in bite-sized pieces that you can appreciate throughout the day. And is the instructor of a popular online course of the same name, Science of Happiness. He's also the best-selling author of The Power Paradox, Born to Be Good, The Compassion Instinct. All of those are linked on the Hungry Book Club website. So if you want to go find them after you hear him speak, which you probably will, you can find those links there at thehungrybook.com/book club. So Dr. Keltner, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Eve, and make sure you call me Dacher.
Dacher, okay. Yeah. All right. So I just want to start with the context of your work in Hungry. So in the book, I do walk through studies, many of your studies, that show that exposure to the outdoors doesn't just make us feel happier, it actually makes us nicer to one another. It makes us more generous, more kind, more likely to be cooperative and helpful. And you've even found in your own work, decreased entitlement and greater, I think you call it ethicality. I would love for us to just start off with a really basic question, which is, why is being in nature so core to our well-being? Why are we seeing these kinds of benefits?
Well, the way that we answer that question, and how we think about it in science is there is what we would call a sort of a proximal cause of those effects. And that's very simply that nature, we evolve these emotions, what were E.O. Wilson called biophilia, and indigenous peoples knew, 10,000 years ago, which is the sense of beauty, the sense of awe, the sense of wonder, terror, we have an emotional relationship to nature that happens, those emotions then produce a lot of these benefits like, wow, I'm just a small part of a big thing. I don't deserve to be entitled. Or, whoa, this is an amazing gift this spring day. I will share with other people. And then the deeper reason or the distal cause of those effects is something that is at the heart of what is called indigenous science of the 5,000 indigenous peoples around the world. Emerson was obsessed with it, and others, which is we evolve to be part of nature, to collaborate with nature, to connect to nature. Our mind is part of nature. And so when we're out in nature, as Emerson wrote about, it releases some of our deepest ethical tendencies, right? Because that was how we evolved as a species, is to become a collaborative member of an ecosystem.
And a lot of what we've been exploring as a group, and I apologize, I'm in New York City today. You can hear the sirens probably. You might hear some crying babies too. Part of what we've been exploring really is rising rates of anxiety and depression
Yeah,
and loneliness.
yeah.
How much do you think our disconnect from nature is responsible for these mental health ailments that so many of us are struggling with?
Wow, that question just gave me goosebumps. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of data that we've summarized that if you're close to nature, even like, if you're close to Central Park, you'll have lower depression and anxiety. If you have a garden, you have lower depression and anxiety. If you regularly put beautiful flowers in your room, you'll have lower depression and anxiety for the reasons that we just talked about with your first wonderful question. And I think that this is, the rise in anxiety and depression, it's doubled since COVID, in young people and rising dramatically in people over the age of 30. My hunch is 20 to 30% of that is due to our disconnect with nature. And that's also one of the opportunities of this COVID period is people are talking about like, even I've been in my garden more, like, wow, this is great, so is to find that again, because it's one of our deepest sources of eudaimonia or flourishing. And so that would be my scientific estimate.
Yes. I mean, that is actually, so one of the questions that I had for you was around, hopefulness of this moment.
Yeah.
And, looking at it again, I take kind of the trends of the time and analyze those trends to say, well, okay, what emotions are behind that? And, over the last year, we've seen record high rates of seed sales.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm the garden nerd who belongs to these newsletters for different seed companies who actually had to write, we can't sell to you right now.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Right.
Yeah.
People running out of baby chickens. There's a rising, and this was happening too pre-pandemic. It's just been accelerated over the past year, but people like hoarding succulents. Do you have some hope in terms of this current moment and our return to, whatever the new normal is going to be? Do you think people are recognizing the vital importance of nature during this moment in time?
I do. It's so funny, Eve, like when this all started a year ago, I was like, God, I study happiness and awe, what relevance would that have to a disease? Well, the disease, the virus pandemic is really a commentary on our culture and our systems of our culture. And it presents these opportunities. And one of the striking things for me is people started writing to me like, man, I heard about the seed shortage. Whoa, I've been, there's a lot of return to gardening. Almost everybody can garden in some fashion. There's a huge return to that. There are data showing that people are using local trails like never before, right? Like this tradition of walking has just flourished. So I feel, to your question, that our culture will come out of this and be thinking about, what are the 2 or 3 things that I can change coming out of this? Because we're good at changing in the face of trauma. And I think local natural beauty is going to be one of the 2 or 3, along with, the other one that I study that people have been writing me about, which is touch and hugging. And,
Yeah.
I think we'll return to that with force. And that can be, I just read a study today, a recent report that it's, the 1 to 2% who are flying a lot are doing all of the carbon emissions via the air industry. Well, one solution to that is just to get into your garden or to go on a local walk, right? So I do have hope coming out of this with respect to local natural awe.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a bit about your latest publication, Big Smile, Small Self.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you review for everyone here, what were your key findings? How
yeah.
was the experiment conducted?
Yeah, that was, I was asked, I do a lot of research on awe, which is one of the emotions that connects us to nature and to the goodness of others and to food, and other things, music, et cetera. And so I was asked to translate that by mindful.org into a practice, right? And so I came up with what's called the awe walk. And this is old, and it's very intuitive, which is people go out on regular walks. Why not orient toward the big and the small and the wonder that's in your walk, right? And so Virginia Sturm, who's a neuroscientist at UC San Francisco, led a study where she had people who were 75 years old or older either go out on an awe walk once a week for 8 weeks or a control walk. 75 years old is really interesting because 75 years is when, your happiness tends to rise from about 50 to 75, and then it starts to drop because people start dying, your body becomes more infirm. So that was a great age to do this. They went out, did an awe walk, took a photo of themselves, and then each week reported on how well they were doing. And what we found is through the awe walk, our elderly people became less depressed and anxious. That was produced by shifts in feelings of awe. And then we've been obsessed with how nature makes us feel humble and small in a beautiful way. And lo and behold, in their selfies on their walk, over the course of the study,
This is my favorite part.
their pictures get smaller and they start drifting off to the side if they're part of an awe walk condition, and they're just taking in more of the environment. And that's one of the beauties of nature and awe. It's like you realize, like, wow, the world isn't just me. It's the kids playing on the swings, it's the ice skaters, it's the beautiful leaves, it's the lake or hills. So they start to get a sense of being part of a bigger thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot in my work about the focus over the last many decades on meritocracies and capitalism, the dropping rates of volunteerism, the extractive relationship we have with nature, and then how all of that has become accelerated, hyper-focused through now social media and the obsessive focus on the self. Do you think that the integration of social media is taking us away from that interconnectedness? Because you can also make the other argument, right, which is that the internet allows all of us to be connected.
Yeah.
And to see one another as, equal humans. I'm curious to know, have you looked into that at all or seen any research on this, or what is just your personal opinion on it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important questions. And it's interesting. We surveyed people in 26 countries around the world, really radically different countries. And we said, man, what brings you awe, like deep, sort of sublime feeling? No one mentioned their smartphone. No one mentioned, this is really interesting. And I said this at a tech conference, no one mentioned VR or augmented reality. And I think that's true. I think technology, that kind of digital technology, because of its nature, it isolates it. And in the social scientific literature, one of the most pernicious effects of it, like you say, Eve, is it's getting you to compare to other people who are better than you, and that's just bad news, right? It breaks apart. It's interesting, some of our most interconnected tendencies with nature, with music. It's interesting. Most music evolved where we did it together, And the music technologies individualize it, right? Which is interesting. It's good and bad.
Yeah.
And with social being together. I've worked in tech companies for 10 years. They're not going to solve the problem of how to be together. It's just not in the technology, but it has a lot of upsides, right? It connected people around George Floyd. It connected people around the election. It allows people to share artists who are off the mainstream of the artistic world. So I think in a way, the technologies haven't been thinking about technology in the right way, which is it's a pathway to connectedness.
Right.
And that's what they need to work on, rather than, can I create a $1 billion virtual reality experience that makes me feel like I'm with another person? They should just be figuring out simple ways to make people with other people. So
yeah. This is like, so, a lot of Writing Hungry was really just doing a massive literature review.
yeah.
And what I found was that the only instance, and we talked about this a bit last week with Dr. Primack, was that the only real time that social media seems to facilitate well-being is when it is aiding our ability to connect with others, either helping us arrange offline meetings or helping facilitate connections that are meaningful to us on a level. Like, I found examples of people who have rare diseases and want to connect.
Yeah. Nice.
Or like Reddit boards, people who are like really
Yep.
deep into some obsession and they can find their people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes them feel seen. But those are kind of the rare exceptions.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to bring it back to the awe walk, right? Because we're living in this digital world now, whether we like it or not. And it really is, for many of us, it has, I've become more reliant on it over the past year, for sure.
Yeah.
How can we, with a simple walk outside, facilitate a feeling of awe and gratitude? Can you walk people through that?
Yeah. Thank you for your profound questions, Eve. When you walk outside, one of my favorite authors, Rebecca Solnit, said, she has a book on walking. She's the origin of the word mansplaining, by the way. So important writer. She said she has this great book on like how humans love to walk. We have to remember, much as we're a musical species, we're a walking species. And we moved out of Africa 60,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, in little groups walking. And walking is part of our evolution. And she writes about walking as a form of thought, right? It's a way of the self extending to the environment. And I think there is something about the momentum and dynamics of walking where I become part of a bigger thing. So it's awe-inspiring just in the physical stuff of it. Then there's and this was the art of the awe walk, which, as we said, the study, like, go someplace that makes you feel wonder, go someplace that makes you feel like you're seeing things for the first time, or even if you go there a lot, that you feel awe, right? There's a little part of a park that I go to a lot where I took my daughters when they were toddlers and they swung on the swings. And when I go there, I'm filled with awe at time. So we just said, instead of going on a walk to feel your cardiovascular system get stronger, go on a walk where you're going to find something new. And we also said, look to really small things, because small things reveal deep patterns, little clusters of mushrooms. Whoa, what's that, right? And then also shift out and look for vast perspectives. So shift your perspective out of your ordinary, day-to-day functioning. So that's how we produced it. And it's interesting, Eve, some people found it in trees, some people found it in sunsets, some people found it in time and memories. Well, I went to the softball field where my daughter played. Some people found it in what the philosopher Kierkegaard, I think, called the chance encounters of walking in cities, where you walk in a city like New York and you're suddenly seeing like the kids playing and the strangers talking and the guy giving the food to the woman, and exchanging pleasantries. So much awe, right? So it's just about opening our eyes to what's there with a different mindset.
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn right now. My husband and my toddler and I made the 14-hour drive this past weekend to visit family, and I was on a walk yesterday with my niece, and there was a woman gardening, and we were strolling, and the woman said, "Would you like a flower?" And we walked home with this flower, and my niece is smelling it, and we did have a moment of awe, also just of kindness and
Yeah,
generosity with this
yeah.
woman. Yeah, experience this. Um, if people have questions for Dacher, please submit them now. We have them for another few minutes before he has to run to class. Um, and yeah, to zoom on over to class probably. But I have more questions for you. So, we've really been talking about the interconnectedness with nature. I'm curious to know, in my own work, for this book, in the research, what I also was seeing was really this disconnect from our bodies, from physical
Yeah,
sensation,
yeah,
um, and how that is limiting our ability to feel a sense of like skill building and
yeah.
autonomy and achievement and
Mm,
competence, and really connecting with the physical self.
yeah.
And one practice that I had learned about while doing my research that I started to do was a mindfulness walk in nature,
Mm,
right? Which is, walking outside, but really paying attention to the sounds and the smells and
yeah.
even the taste in the air. Is that component a part of an awe walk, or is that kind of stimulating a different part of your psyche?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be a component of the awe walk. There's no doubt, and you know, um, if you go out and you're attending to sounds, one of my favorite examples of this is the great writer Rachel Carson. She loved going out into nature and listening to sounds, right? And so you listen to a rainstorm or birds calling, and she suggested follow the pattern of the sounds, right? And that can become an experience of awe where you're like, wow, there's one sound. It's actually part of all these birds calling to each other. How are they doing that? Off you go. It could also be what people talk about in terms of savoring or just pleasure, sensory pleasure. Like, this is so pretty right now, or those sounds are so beautiful, or the light, et cetera. So you could probably parse it into different kinds of emotional experiences out there, and all are good.
Yeah, I mean, it blew my mind, honestly, doing the reading about our capacities, our sensorial capacities that are just underutilized right now
Oh
because
my
we are
God.
out in nature.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and it's funny with food, and I love your work. I mean, I feel like large scale agriculture disconnected people from food,
right.
obviously, all the problems that Michael Pollan and others have documented. But we've lost the awe of food in some sense of like, my God, I grew this. Whoa, listen to it, look at its taste, how it's different. So the disconnect to the body is really worrisome. Um, there are interesting counterculture movements, the movement toward dance,
Mhm.
which is one of our oldest forms of social embodiment, and the cool new science on it, is worth looking at as how we can reconnect to interconnectedness.
Yeah, I mean, this is really what I'm focusing my time on now, which is that, the sustainable food that we need, right, is more local, it is more intimate. And what I talk to a lot of people about is that it's not just good for our physical health or for the planet's health, it's also good for our mental health to eat in this
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
So we do
well
have
put.
questions from Lisa Carlson, who said, in the multi-country study that you mentioned, what was brought up as the thing that created awe, if technology?
Aha. Yeah, this is going to be the core of my book. I call them the 8 wonders of life. And this is the largest study of emotion ever. 100 people, 26 countries, from um, all the continents except, Antarctica and the Arctic. Um, First one is human goodness, which is surprising. Second one is collective movement together, dance, sports, yoga. Third is nature. Fourth is music. Fifth is visual stuff, visual design. Sixth is obviously spirituality, religion. And then it gets really interesting. The seventh is epiphany. Like, whoa, I didn't realize it's all capitalism. Oh my God, Marx was right. Yeah. And then the eighth is life and death. That we feel awe when people are born, and we feel awe when people die. And the life-death cycle is profound.
Was there anything in that that really surprised you, even after all these
Oh
decades?
yeah, you would think the human goodness that dominates. I mean, it's about 40 to 50% of worldwide all responses, and that's surprising. People are like, wow, that a stranger's generosity, kindness that you talked about, courage, overcoming. I was really surprised by death being so common. Most cultures have rich traditions around dying and consecration and rituals and the like. Our culture has obviously medicalized it, and it becomes this horrifying thing. That was surprising. The fact that big ideas make us feel awe was cool. One of my favorites was a person from Japan was in a museum of natural history, and he was like, I can't believe we've evolved. He's just like, my God, it's so amazing. And being Darwin's one of my heroes, and I was like, and that's what Darwin, he felt awe about evolution of life, and so it's really cool. And then the other surprising thing was it's not a religious emotion. It's not. People, when they hear I study awe, they're like, oh, you study religion? It's like, no, that's secondary to this very fundamental emotion.
Well, I don't want to keep you from getting to class. I don't want you to be the reason you're late. I'm so deeply appreciative for the time that you spent with us and for sharing your wisdoms and research. It's absolutely fascinating. And I encourage everyone to look up Dacher's work and continue exploring, because at least I have found it has enriched my life considerably.
Thank you, Eve. Well, we're really grateful to have you as part of our family and be part of these conversations. They're really important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
We're going to continue. I'm going to present just a little bit more about how our search for purpose and meaning in life has been showing up in everyday culture. And then we're just going to have a group conversation. It's been my favorite part of this whole book club process, is really hearing from all of you. I'm now feeling like maybe you are seeing my notes and not my presentation. So hold on. Talking about the difficulties of technology. Oh, here we go. Hold on 1 second. Got to make one screen smaller, working through all of these different things. I hope you all were able to see why I was so incredibly excited to have Dacher Keltner join us. I really, the work around our connectedness to nature has shifted my entire mindset on my own well-being. I struggle with anxiety and depression, like a lot of people do. And after reading his work and the work of many others, especially during the pandemic, for me, it's meant I have to get outside every day. It's meant I'm putting plants in the room where I sit. It has meant that I also, even doing something simple, like when I'm taking a shower, I take moments to really center myself and focus on the sensation of the water on my skin. You can do this also when you're eating. Take a minute and really think about what it is that you're eating from a textural perspective, from a color perspective, right? It's sight, it's sound, it's taste. From kind of backing up, to Maslow. So Maslow, a psychologist in 1948, came out with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and finding a sense of purpose and meaning in life was really at the top of his pyramid, of his hierarchy, and he called it self-actualization. And to Maslow, finding purpose and meaning in life meant that we have a sense of achievement, of mastery, that we have self-respect and also feel respected by others, but that we feel as though we're realizing and reaching our personal potential, which means seeking and experiencing those kind of growth and peak experiences Over time, what I've found is that creating, quote, meaning in life is multifaceted. Part of it is skill building. Part of it is that interconnectedness with nature. And I think, the reason for that is that kind of sense of small self that Dacher was talking about. And then greater good, doing something for the greater good, appreciating the greater good. I've had conversations with people where they say, purpose in life, like, we can't all save the world. And that's not what I'm talking about when I say purpose, right? Purpose can mean you're feeding a family member, you're growing something from seed. So we do have a poll for everyone. I am curious to know, Francesca, if you wouldn't mind popping this up on the screen. On a typical day, how much time do you spend outdoors? And this can be a typical day during the pandemic. And by outdoors, I mean not in a house or a building or enclosed transportation. Your car, bus, train does not count. So I'm going to give people just a few seconds to answer this quick poll. The reason I'm asking is probably pretty obvious here, right? I mean, this is a major indication of our state of well-being, and there's a number of studies that have been done over the last decade, in particular, on our decreasing time spent outdoors. And this is one of the questions that we asked our Hungry Study participants. So for the Hungry Book, I ran an original survey with Data Central of 1,100 people across the United States, looking at well-being, relationship to food, and digital technology. I think, Francesca, we can go ahead and close the poll. I'm eager to know what people's responses were. And one of the things that we were exploring was people's interconnectedness with nature. I'm not seeing the poll results quite yet. I think you might have to hit one more button to share. And for the Hungry Study, I can at least show you what those results were. The Hungry Study answers were that people were spending the vast majority of respondents in this 1,100 person survey were spending less than 30 minutes outdoors. About 22%, just under a quarter, were spending more than 1 hour. Really not a lot of time. Although from Dacher Keltner's work, we can see that actually even just 15 minutes outdoors, if you're really focusing in on the experience of being outdoors, it can facilitate that sense of well-being. Francesca, if you are able to share the polling answers, just pop them up at any time, and if not, that's fine. This is the problem with technology, right? It doesn't do what we need. I wish we were all just in person with some coffee in hand and could just raise hands and talk about it. But one of the things we looked at in the Hungry Study was our relationship to technology, and how that's impacting well-being. And we ended up kind of identifying this other group that we call the IRLers, the people who lived what we said in real life. We define them as people who spend more than 45 minutes outside every day. They spend more than 3 hours a day making things with their hands, and they're able to name more than 3 wild local plants. And on questions related to meaning, like I'm seeking a purpose or meaning in life, I feel uncertain about my goals, I'm looking for something that makes my life feel meaningful, that should say meaningful. What we found is that the IRL cohort, so the in real life people who are spending more time outside, more time making things, they were less likely than the general population to agree with these statements. It was still pretty high, but lower than the general population. Then the tech tethered cohort, the people in our study who spent the most time on screens attached to their devices, were far more likely than the general population and the IRL cohort to say that they were looking for meaning in life. I found what Dacher said about finding awe, and no one saying they're finding it on their phone, to be very, very relevant to this point, right? I mean, I spend so much time thinking about this, and I still have a really ambivalent relationship with technology because I do see the benefits of it. But in this research, it just became so blatant that really what makes us feel contented is a connection with ourselves and with the world around us, the physical world around us. And these kinds of trends are showing up in everyday culture. So our desire for tangible experiences, if you think about the rise of the digital age, we also saw the rise of the DIY movement. During this particular period of time, we've seen people turning to gardening, to sourdough bread. Prior to this, you remember like the whole craze around adult coloring books? That was really about like having something physical, non-screen time to do. Brewing beer, home brewing has also been a part of this, making hot sauce at home. There is also a desire for purpose showing up in nature and culture. So sometimes that means farming. There is a rising number of young farmers today, particularly millennials who are from urban and suburban backgrounds are actually joining the farming community. Um, there's an interest in foraging. Biophilic design is a big thing in the tech space, which is just super ironic, right? You have Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, all of these big tech companies. They've read the same studies that I've read that say being in nature helps with creativity. It makes people more kind. It makes you more productive. And so, what have they done? They've just put plants inside their offices. That's biophilic design. During the pandemic, we've seen, interest in camping, plant parenthood, hiking. While I was doing research for the book, it was also really fascinating, especially in Asia, to see the ubiquity of animal cafes. In Korea, I went to a sheep cafe. There were like actual sheep outside that you could pet. But there's meerkat cafes and cat cafes and snake cafes and whatever you want, but it's bringing a little bit of nature into the city. And we're also seeing this desire for purpose, of course, showing up in pro-social behaviors, right? People wanting to do good with their purchases, whether that's investing in regenerative goods and socially just goods, fair trade, sustainable, zero waste, really feeling like kind of that more grand vision of meaning and purpose, having a positive impact on others, contributing to the solution instead of the problem, is also something that we are seeing accelerated even during the pandemic. This is also something that I've been following really closely. In March, March of last year, there was this idea that the pandemic was going to slow down the sustainability movement. It has been a catalyst. It has driven people forward, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it is that sense of small self that each of us has had during this pandemic. It would be really interesting to look at that. But we have in fact seen a rising concern on climate issues. So looking ahead, what does this actually mean? How is this desire for purpose going to show up in culture post-COVID? I'm expecting a rising number of people to be farming and gardening. I do think that the trend of agrihoods, of people moving outside of city centers or incorporating gardens, some kind of natural life, even in cities, is going to become even more important. We've seen, right, passion for pets and DIY. But I also think that there's probably going to be a movement towards self-reliance, in part for that sense of safety and control, but also just because it's satisfying, right? Whether it's like woodworking or gardening or making sourdough bread, these things are, we are rewarded for those activities on a physiological and psychological level. And this is, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it manifests in the years to come. So the time that we have left is really just to engage in conversation around this. I'm eager to hear what each of you have been thinking about in terms of finding a sense of meaning and purpose during this period of time. I encourage you, if you have your cameras off, please turn them on. Feel free, you can add questions at any point in the chat. And it's just been, for me, it's just been kind of this has been the hardest part, right? Is waking up every morning and saying, what's my purpose? What's the meaning of getting up when I can't leave the house, when I can't see people? Anyway, I'm curious to hear what you all have been saying. So Julia said, it's been really bad during the pandemic. I noticed how much better I feel when I'm outside. Have been considering, even pre-pandemic, a move upstate expressly to make access to nature easier. I think we have a small enough group today, which is great. If you want to speak, please feel free. You can just unmute yourselves. If you want to raise hands, you can raise hands. But I'm, for Julia, I'm in New York right now. There's noticeably less people. And I can, hear from others that you are not alone in thinking about going upstate. I mean, there's so many people who have left the city. I'm curious to know, is there anyone here who has actually moved, like changed where you live in order to be closer to nature during the pandemic? Amy?
I have.
Yeah. hasn't improved.
It wasn't, I mean, I had to move for lots of reasons, financial and to be near family but I did move from San Francisco Bay Area up to the Sierra foothills, and I'm surrounded just now looking out the window by beautiful pine trees, and there's a creek nearby and I can hear the nature, and it definitely helps my mood.
Yeah. Does anyone, I mean, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead. I can't see you speaking.
Hi, Eve. It's Deanne. You can't see me, but I literally, after spending last spring into summer in the cold, rainy Northeast outside of New York City, where it rained incessantly and was just miserable being in the house all the time, I sold my house there and moved to Florida. And I'm in Naples and it's beautiful and sunny and I can bike and walk outside every day. And I would agree with Amy, it does wonders for your mental health and mood.
So I'm curious because I think, you know, my work has really been centered on those in the food and lifestyle industries. And I'm guessing that a good number of you work in the food and lifestyle industries. Do you think that this is going to continue to show up in these aspects of food and lifestyle culture? I don't have the answer to these things. You know, are we going to, what responsibility do brands have is really one of the questions that I think about. What responsibility do companies have to facilitate these kinds of interactions that by all means seem to be pretty critical to our well-being? Does anyone have any thoughts on that they would be willing to share? And we don't bite. There's no judgment in this space.
Hi, this is Carlos from Spain. So maybe I can add a different angle since I see most people are joining from the US. So I'm in Zaragoza, which is a mid-city, right? Just in the middle of Barcelona and Madrid. And before coming here, we used to live, well, in Madrid, but actually just before that, we were living in Bogota, which is a 10 million inhabitant city, crazy city. So my experience, I mean, we didn't move because of the pandemic, but we moved just like a year before. So it was completely different experience. We have a small garden. I mean, we have more like a, let's say, mid-city lifestyle. It's way better in that regard. And I don't know if I understood your question, because right now I'm working on a startup, on an app, which basically helps people to be well, to feel better by helping them cooking very simple meals, right? So what we're seeing is that, at least in Spain, where is our biggest base, is that people are trying to incorporate, you know, these habits into the long run. So I mean, I think people is still reacting, I think, because there's a lot of people is tired. So I think right now, I don't know if everything is like positives and all, as we were discussing before. I think there are a lot of positives, but again, I think people still like feeling stressed, anxious, and that is making them sometimes to behave perhaps even against those healthy habits.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because, right, we're in this culture right now that is encouraging us to spend more time on screens. That's encouraging us to hit like and upvote, yet the vast majority of us are finding well-being by doing things that are offline, or at least doing things that, if you know, our online technologies are helping to facilitate offline.
Yeah.
And I'm curious.
And we're seeing that, in cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that in cooking. For instance, we spend a lot of time interviewing people, and what we're seeing is that perhaps they get to cooking because one reason, but then they discover cooking. And I think that the magic of cooking is twofold. First, I think it allows you to do something with your hands and see the product, right? So most people talk to us about the achievement. That's, I'm connecting with what you just said about Maslow, right? So it's achievement, right? And self-realization because of the achievement. But second, I think it makes people be more mindful of the food they eat, and share that food perhaps with the family, right? Yeah. So I think those senses, I think, are on the rise. Would be my hope, at least.
It's also interesting because thank you, Carlos, for sharing. It's, I've also found in my own practice, so I've, tried to become more mindful of my own food. That in turn also made me less wasteful, because I'm trying to now, when I sit down to eat, to think about, where did this item grow? Who raised it? Thinking even about like the sunlight and the water that facilitated its growth. And then you really get down to realizing, oh my gosh, I am so intimately connected with this earth. I am literally eating nutrients that were once in the ground, and those nutrients are now fueling my own growth. And I think that facet of eating has been removed for so many of us, because we eat on the go, we're drinking our Soylent, we're having our bar, we're eating while working. Spain has had this lovely culture of at least like pausing midday that I do feel like has been dwindling somewhat in the last decade. I actually lived in Barcelona after college, and it was one of the beautiful experiences for me. Was like, oh my gosh, you actually take your siesta, take your break.
Yeah.
All the trends are showing right now that people at home. So there's kind of this divergence that people have been seeing. There's some people like me, honestly, who are working way more hours, who are not eating well. And then there's a whole other facet of society that never ate lunch with their families before. They never cooked lunch, and now they're doing that. And those people, at least in surveys right now, are saying, I never want to go back to eating at my desk again. Yeah. Has anyone had that experience? And if so, do you think that it's realistic? Do you think that our culture can shift enough to facilitate these kinds of more mindful experiences throughout the day? Jesse wrote, is there any literature related to some people need to have those hands-on based experiences where others are cerebral and don't need to physically engage? It's a really good question. I have personally not seen anything that says there are not people who need physical sensation. Every single one of us needs it. I think that you could probably think about like the autism spectrum. That's what my mind is going to, right? There's some people where touch or sound makes them uncomfortable, but that is not the vast majority of us. It was really interesting to actually do some research around the physical sensations and how that does aid. Carlos, as you were saying, right? Part of what's so satisfying about cooking, if you're paying enough attention to it, is like even like the sizzle of an onion in the pan, or smelling as it goes from sharp to sweet. Right? That can in and of itself create that sense of awe. And then, right, at the end of it, you're also like, holy crap, I made this and it's delicious. And then I get to feed other people with it, right? It's like this beautiful circle. It's actually facilitating a sense of meaning and purpose on multiple levels if you are mindful enough about the process. Instead of just kind of going through the steps and saying, oh, I have to make dinner. Okay, did I do this? Fine, Jack, check. Does anyone have a mindfulness practice? I see Benjamin, you might want to say something. You're muted.
Of course. Sorry, thank you so much. I was just going to add to the moments of awe conversation. I had a moment of awe with my mom, who was visiting me out from the Northeast here in Colorado this last week, with a pour over coffee in the morning. Used to using a coffee pot and making it. every morning and pressing the button, and you have your pot of coffee ready to go. And I live by myself here and just do the pour over every morning. And I told her about how much I love the first moment when you just pour the first bit of water over the grounds and you just get it damp and you start the process, and just putting my face like into that steam that's coming up and getting this fresh smell of the coffee as it's being made. And I also have a friend who works on a coffee farm in Kona, Hawaii, who a little while ago shared his mindful pour over coffee morning ritual, which is not just, pour it over until it hits the top and then walk away and come back 5 minutes later. It's, pour a little bit at a time and let it drain and smell it and appreciate it. And, to the point where a few minutes later, you have a full cup of coffee, but you've been present with every step of the process. And so I shared that with my mom, and we both kind of stood over it, just being in awe of how amazing and delicious this way was to start your day.
And it's a meditative experience, right?
Thank you for that.
Does anyone else have a way that they've been integrating moments of awe into their life? whether it's just this year or prior to that? Because I think, I'm going to speak on behalf of everyone, but I think we all need to be working on creating those moments of awe and gratitude on a daily basis.
Honestly, like for our family, I have teenage kids, and every day we go for a walk, and it's several miles, and we've been doing it since the beginning of this lockdown a year ago. And I think it's just so uplifting for everyone. We all look forward to it, and just meaningful to us. But I was just going to touch on what you had said before. Now that so many people are using videos to do work, it's almost like, with normal work, you would have a beginning and an end, right? You would get in a car and that would mark the beginning, and you'd leave your car and be in an office, and then you would transition by getting back in the car and then coming home. And there was a way, like there was a given allotment of time that you could shut down. But now I feel that it's just constant. There's never an end point, and people expect you to respond all the time. And I've noticed specifically in my husband, when he finishes work, he'll emerge from his basement office and go outside, and he needs a minute. He just needs time to decompress before he shifts into, now it's home time.
This is something that I've been thinking about as well for a while, because a lot of people ask me, like, well, what are the future trends going to be? Right? And to answer that question, I actually think about, well, what are the expectations of work going to be, right? Because as these technologies became integrated into our lives, work-life balance completely disappeared. I even experienced this in trying to change my name. For anyone paying attention, I was Eve Turow, and then I was Eve Paul, and now I'm Eve Turow-Paul, because I couldn't actually keep my married name separate from my working name. It was just confusing people. So I had to change my name for a second time because my work and my life were just so embedded into one another. I couldn't tell when I was working and when I wasn't, and who I was talking to that was in each other world, right? So we've integrated these technologies. France actually is the first country to have enacted rules now on when you can be expected to respond to emails from the workplace, and when you can't. But
what are the rules?
Well, I can find it. This is interesting.
I think it's you're not expected to send an email during the weekends, and from I think like 6 p.m. onwards, right. Something like that.
Yeah, I think it's
of course you're not expected to answer it, but it's considered, right, I think, kind of an offense if you do it.
But it's like the government had to step in and be like, hey, employers, you are endangering your employees' well-being. Here are the rules we are going to impose on you. And I'm also fascinated by like the 4-day work week, because for me, I think about, well, how can I get more time in nature? right? How can I get more time making things? You know, I would love to personally learn carpentry. That's something I've always wanted to do. I have no idea when I'm going to do that with my time. But if places like the Googles of the world say, well, we're not going to make it cool anymore to say, oh, I was working all weekend, right? Are we going to get to a place where if someone says, oh, I was working all weekend, someone's going to look at you and be like, dude, you're really unproductive. Like, what's wrong with you? Right? Like, if you can't get your work done in the 4 days, right, of the you know, supposed work week, then that is the measurement of progress, right? Like, how much time did you spend outdoors? How much time did you spend doing your hobbies? That is actually the sign of somebody who is being productive in life. If we're able to get to that stage as a global society, then the world and lifestyle trends are going to look extremely different than if we stay on the path that we're currently on, which is working more, working all the time, indoors, on screens, less in-person time. I personally don't know which way we're going to go. Does anyone here have any, we have 1 minute left, but does anyone have any hope that we're going to go towards that trajectory of the 4-day work week and celebrating immediate productivity, or are we doomed? Benjamin, you're giving a thumbs up.
I have hope, lots of hope and even faith, which I feel is sometimes a stronger word. I'm super fortunate to be working in our event is an expo that brings together companies in the plant-based food space. And so just from my role of programming the conference for the expo, I get to connect with so many inspiring people who I feel are finding work-life balance by finding meaningful work and making life and work really the same thing. You're working on weekends, not because you weren't productive enough all week, but because you love what you do and there's time to do it on the weekends. So let's do it there too. And so I feel like I'm blessed with the faith that comes from connecting with so many people who are on that path. And I can see it, that you don't go back once you're on it, and you only continue to inspire more people to find that path once you are. And so I feel like that's a movement that's not going to stop. And I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Well,
I wonder about I hope that's true. But given how much money people lost during this pandemic, I don't know if that is possible for a lot of people. It could be a little bit elitist. There's a lot of people out there who are really hurting from this pandemic, and they're going to work whenever they can. But I like to work kind of maybe a little bit on the weekends, because then I could take the afternoons off. So, so one person's 5-day work week with weekends off might be rejuvenating, whereas for somebody else, it might be the flexibility of taking an afternoon off and getting outside every day, waking up a few hours on a Sunday afternoon. So I don't know.
Yeah. We are at 1 o'clock, so I do want to just say thank you to everybody who participated. Benjamin, I hear what you're saying 100%. And I think that it's really about, how do we facilitate that sense of well-being, but also create a culture in which more people have access to that way of life that is fulfilling for each and every one of us. Again, thank you so much for everyone who contributed. This has been meaningful for me. I hope everyone learned a little bit of something and found some connection. And I hope that everyone gets outside for a walk today.
Thanks, Eve.
Thank you. Very, very insightful and very good sessions.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you.
Bye.